Hello viewers and welcome to this week's edition of the Jctr Corner. Today we are looking at the cost of living vis-a-vis increasing mealie meal prices amidst the coronavirus. In recent weeks, we as a nation experienced sporadic shortages of mealie meal in many parts of the country. Remember, mealie meal is Zambia's staple food. Modesta, welcome to the program and how are you doing?
Thank you. I'm well, thank you. It's good to be back again.
Okay, so as Jctr, what do you think led to the shortages of mealie meal recently, and what do you think should be done in order to ensure that the commodity floods the market at all the time?
Well, last year, that's 2018-2019 rainfall patterns were not so favorable in our country.
Okay.
I think that's one of the things that led to limited supply of the maize, which is turned into mealie meal. And what can be done? I think we need to move from relying on maize, seeing that climate change is really affecting us, so we don't receive as much rainfall as we used to in time past, which is also affecting our harvest of maize.
Okay, so how can we link these high mealie meal prices to the cost of living, looking at how some people were just exaggerating the mealie meal prices in the last few weeks, because I could see maybe a bag of mealie meal, a 25-kilogram bag of mealie meal was going as far as 260 kwacha.
Okay, so the cost of living, which just looks at how much people are spending on food and other items. So up to now, as Zambians, we still rely on maize as our staple food, which is mostly consumed in most of the houses around. So which means that when the prices go up, people will have to also increase the allocation of their income onto that commodity so as to continue having the same amount. Yeah, so that leads to an increase in the cost of living for most of the individuals out there.
So when you say it leads to the increase in the cost of living to the people out there, what impact does it have on the already vulnerable people, already poor households that we have in our society?
It compromises mostly their health living, which means now they can't consume what they used to consume back then. So maybe they have to substitute or cut on the number of meals that they're having, which eventually affects their health.
Okay, thank you so much, Modesta. So in case you're just joining us, this is the Jctr Corner, and today we are looking at the cost of living vis-a-vis increasing mealie meal prices amidst the coronavirus. Modesta, in view of this latest problem, the coronavirus, how much impact is it going to have on the poor households, bearing in mind that most nations, if at all not all of them, are experiencing zero or reduced production due to the maybe lockdown and the measures that have been put in place?
Well, as Zambia and most of the people in our society, we can say they live on a hand-to-mouth kind of lifestyle. And a reduction in production or business activities out there, economic activities for most people means reduction in income levels. With maybe they will have little or no income access, which means they can't really afford or they can't really buy or have access to food that they used to have back then. And then looking at the impact of other countries also reducing their production, and also maybe the lockdowns that we're having, the closing of the borders, and all the measures that have been put in place. Zambia is mostly an import country, which means that most of our things come from outside into the country. Now, if we have these lockdowns, we have these border limits, it means we cannot have access to certain types of commodities or items which are needed by most individuals to just have food and live a decent life.
Okay, thank you so much. Are you able to highlight maybe some of the consequences that would come into the nation as a result of a lockdown in circumstances where we might see ourselves as a nation heading that way, looking at the number of cases that are escalating with regards to the coronavirus?
If we happen to have a lockdown, which means people will not be allowed to carry on their daily activities, like I said, most of the Zambian people live on a hand-to-mouth, meaning that maybe someone is just selling in a cantemba, as they call it, or someone is selling tomatoes. A lockdown would mean that that activity must be put to a stop, which means they don't have access to income, and then they cannot afford, or they cannot have access to food that is needed for their daily lives.
Okay, so how then can we strike a balance? By this I mean we have the high cost of living on one hand and the coronavirus on the other hand. How then can we strike a balance looking at the two?
I can say we're at a crossroad right now at the moment.
Okay.
If we say people go out there, are we certain that they are actually keeping the social distance that is required? If we say people go out there, we might increase the risk of transmitting the virus from one person to another. If we say they stay home, we might be hit by hunger. So looking at the balance that we can make, maybe I can say there are certain industries that are critical, like the agriculture industry. Farmers need to have maybe some area where they can offload their goods. At the moment, we hear most people talking about going to Soweto to buy their food, but maybe we need to decentralize it and look at farmers from different areas going to different markets to offload their food so that people can have access instead of everyone traveling or going to Soweto to get food from there.
So looking at what you've just mentioned, to me, it's more like you're putting a measure or you're recommending something for government to do. How best can you explain it to them or to someone out there who doesn't understand what exactly we are talking about? In simple terms, how can you make them understand to say, we really need to be in the country operating normally. At the same time, we're experiencing the coronavirus pandemic.
Okay, like I said earlier, we need to maybe decentralize Soweto markets.
Okay.
I've heard of markets, farmers from the eastern part of the country. Some offload their goods at, is it Mutendere market? So you can find, we can have measures where the southern part of farmers that come from the southern part, maybe they don't really have to go to Soweto to sell their goods. They can just bring it to a central place that can cater for the people in the southern part. The eastern part can also have their own. Then Soweto is decentralized like that, and it's less populated. But if we continue to have people going to, and we want people to continue with their daily activities, it means we put them at risk when they're traveling, when they are being in contact with people. At the moment, people still handle money, so there's that exchange of money from one person to the other. And given how the disease is transmitted, which is through droplets, that maybe may be on your hands or any surface that you touch. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Modesta. For now, let's go on a short break. We'll be back shortly.
To advertise on this program and enjoy amazing introductory rates, please call us on +260 211 290959 or +260 211 290912 or +260 953 538 000 or send us an email at loyolazam@gmail.com.
Welcome back, viewers. You're still on the Jctr corner, and today we are looking at the cost of living vis-a-vis increasing meal prices amidst the coronavirus. So, Modesta, the Zambian government has been talking about poverty reduction and going by the Jctr's food basket, or rather the basic needs and nutrition basket, as you call it now. Do you think we're on the right track in terms of reducing poverty on households, especially those that we deem to be poor and vulnerable in our society? Maybe as you explain that, would you also tell us why you changed the name from the food basket, the initial BNB that we used to know, to the new BNNB?
Okay, let me start with your second question.
Okay.
So we changed the basket from the initial basic needs basket to the basic needs and nutrition basket to put in the component of nutrition.
Okay.
So we were looking at people not only consuming food or having access or being able to afford certain foods, but we're also concerned about what quantity those foods contain. So we introduced the nutritional part to read.
Okay.
Yes. And then the second one, given what we've been looking at from the past, I can speak how we moved from January last year to January this year. There was a significant increase, if I can call it that. We see the basket jumping from 5,000, over 5,000 to 7,400 plus for January, that's January 2020. But also if we look at December 2019 and January 2020, it also increased from 6,000 plus to 7,000, the figure that I just gave. So being on the track of reducing the cost of living for most Zambians there, I don't think we are. The basket has been increasing over the past months, over the past years. Yes. And then some of the things that were contributing actually to the increase in the price in the baskets were things like fuel prices, electricity, and also foods. Yes. Foods like, because we brought in the nutritional part, we realized that people needed to have access to things like fruits and vegetables. And then you find that for an ordinary Zambian, a fruit is not that affordable. Okay. Yeah. We try to separate bananas, which are quite affordable, from other fruits, which include apples, oranges, and mangoes, which are seasonal. So that still affected the price of the basket.
Okay, I've noticed you've mentioned the price of the basket, but my question really was, is the government doing enough to ensure that maybe the poverty reduction or the cost of living in the nation is being upgraded or improved?
No, I've been mentioning the price of the basket, which is like a measure of the cost of living for most Zambian people. And like I said, it's been on the increase, which is an indication that not much is being done to try and bring the levels, or to try and bring the cost of living for an ordinary Zambian below, or to a point where they can access and have adequate amount of food and other basic needs to live a dignified life.
Okay, so how best can you advise the government in terms of uplifting the standards of the people of the nation?
Okay, one of the things that we've noticed mostly affecting the lives of people using our basket is agriculture. Okay. It is a major industry that we can go into, and not only talking about maize, but diversifying our crops and also coming up with climate change resilient crops that can be supplied throughout the year, even if we don't really receive significant amounts of rain. That is one way to bring it down. And like I said earlier, some of the things that are increasing, that are putting pressure on the price of most commodities is electricity, fuel pumps, such things, and the exchange rate also. Seeing that we are an import country, most people buy things from outside, which means that when they come here and the exchange rate is not favorable, the price of that commodity that was imported will definitely go up. Okay. And also fuel prices, for someone to move their goods, they have to look at that. And if the price is up, which means that the transportation system also, or the transportation of those goods from one point to another, will also put an increase on the price of whatever is being transported.
Okay, thank you so much, Modesta, for that explanation. I just wanted to find out how many bags of mealie meal is a family of 5 expected to have or to consume in a month?
The recommended number of bags of mealie meal by the basket, or that we record on the basket, is 2. Okay. Yes. So when we say the mealie meal prices, we're going as high as 260. Yes. Which means for a family of 5, they had to spend over 500 kwacha just on mealie meal. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We know that there are some millers who are getting subsidized maize from the Food Reserve Agency, FRA. And in your view, those millers, sometimes they're exaggerating prices. They're not really selling the milli meal according to the recommended retail price. Would you say that FRA is doing enough to ensure that the supply of maize is enough for the millers to produce milli meal for everyone?
Like I said, production of maize is not only reliant on the availability of, rather production of milli meal is not only reliant on the availability of maize.
Okay.
There are issues like electricity, there's transportation of that commodity, even as much as maybe maize can be made available, but what is the cost of them really producing it? When you look at electricity, do they use subsidized electricity as well? Or they use, looking at the hours of load shedding that we're receiving, meaning that people will have to use other means of energy to try and produce that milli meal or a bag of milli meal, which may also include, for others, the buying of fuel, which is also high. So we can say maize is made available by FRA, but then what is the cost of actually transforming it from maize to milli meal? And if we're saying they are giving them enough, they can give them enough, but they still have to transport that from one place to another. So they also still have to factor in the price of transportation and also electricity. So they might try to bring it down to the recommended retail price, but we might find that maybe in some case they might not even reach the profit margin that they're required to reach.
Okay. So under the circumstances that you've just explained, what would you tell the government out there and the people who are expecting to receive maybe the normal or recommended retail price of milli meal from the millers who they think are getting subsidized maize from FRA? How would you best advise the people? How can you make them understand to say we need to factor in all these other things like transport, electricity, and the like?
I think it comes with what I can call behavioral change.
Okay.
Yeah, they need to take into account other things. Yes, we can be celebrating that FRA has released maize on the market and whatnot, but when we look at ZESCO just recently announced that they're going back to, is it 10 to 15 hours of load shedding?
Yeah.
Fuel is also at 17 kwacha, if we're talking of petrol. So if we factor all those other issues into the production of milli meal, it really can give you a picture of what is really affecting the price or the scarcity. Again, putting into account that we didn't really have enough harvest of maize. So maybe it's time for a country or for us as Zambians to move from maize into other products that can replace this effect that we're receiving due to rainfall patterns. Maybe it's time to replace maize milli meal or maize meal with cassava, but then it takes behavioral change as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Modesta. So viewers, you're still tuned into the Jctr corner, and today we are looking at the Jctr corner, and today we are looking at the cost of living vis-a-vis increasing milli meal prices amidst the coronavirus. So Modesta, let's go back to the coronavirus. As a country, do you think we are doing enough to ensure that the numbers are not escalating?
We're still not keeping the social distance that we've been advised to keep. But I've noticed that most of the organizations actually taking into consideration what was advised or the measures that were given to us by the Minister of Finance. That's having water available, water and soap at each point. When someone is coming in or going out, they wash their hands. Sanitizers are being made available, though with the increase in demand, the prices of these commodities are also going up. And then workers, like civil servants, they've reduced the number of working hours for them, and they've come up with schedules. But at an individual level, maybe that's where we need to go deeper and see what people are really doing. Do they understand what it means to keep social distance, or why we're emphasizing on washing of hands, sanitizing your hands, and probably staying at home if you really don't need to move, move when it is necessary. Maybe that's when we can get a clear picture on whether we are doing what is required as a country.
Okay, I remember when the president was making those pronouncements to say we are putting in measures in order for us not to have escalated number of coronavirus issues or cases in our nation. At that time, the cases stood at 16, but as it is now, I think they've gone up to 35, if I'm not mistaken. So would you say that those measures were sufficient for the country?
We've put in measures, but most of the cases that we're recording are people traveling from outside, and we still have our borders open, so we have a probability or possibility of even having more cases being recorded by virtue of people coming from outside into the country, and those might escalate into person-to-person transmission. For example, if I say there are 5 people in a house, and then one of them maybe was transporting the people from the airport, someone that is affected by the coronavirus, and then unknowingly they actually contract or are exposed to the risk, then they go back home. We are not really certain that the person that has gone home will not pass it on to the other person. So that means 1, and then it goes to the 4 in the house, which makes it 5. So we might actually see an increase in the numbers of people maybe having the coronavirus.
So in your view, would you say that maybe we have a lot of cases out there as opposed to what we have been told or what has been announced by the minister?
Well, the minister has said he's doing follow-ups, so maybe we can wait and see how far we've gone following those people that have actually been in contact with people that have come from outside. Like, we heard that the driver that was driving the man from Pakistan contracted the virus. So maybe if we follow them up and then follow the ones that he was in contact with, we might get a different picture.
Okay. This whole corona thing is really disturbing. I've seen a number of countries going into a lockdown. How would you term a lockdown for a country like Zambia? What impact can it have on the people, looking at the nature of business that people do in this country? We have these people with small businesses like Tuntemba selling vegetables, tomatoes here and there, and the money they get is from hand to mouth. So what can it mean for a lockdown? What can it mean if we were to have a lockdown as a nation?
Well, I can say the economic effects of a lockdown will be severe. Already we are seeing the effects that are coming from the airports being shut down, meaning that most people, we're hoping it doesn't get to that, might actually lose their jobs. And then for the people in societies out there who have a lifestyle which is described as hand to mouth, and then we put a lockdown, meaning that they cannot carry on with their daily activities, like I said earlier, which limits their access to income. And most people, we all know that we need some form of income to buy whatever we need for our daily lives.
So Modesta, as Jctr, do you have any recommendations as to what government would do, adding up to the measures that were already put in place amidst the coronavirus pandemic?
The measures that have been put in place by government are measures that are mostly were given to us by the World Health Organization. So I think we need to put in more pressure on people to actually adhere to the measures that have been put in place. Those are measures that have helped other countries. I believe they can also help Zambia to try and curb or put a stop to the further transmissions of the disease.
Okay,
Yeah.
in terms of monitoring, what do you think can be the best mechanism to ensure that everyone is adhering to these measures that have been put in place?
It's a mindset changing. I think we're already putting out the message out there, but we need to put more, like, to just remind people of what needs to be done. And also public transport, which is used by most Zambians, besides walking as well. Yeah, we also need to put strict measures in that area. Washing of hands is not in itself enough, and also sanitizing our hands. Remember, there's talking, we need to keep a certain distance so that the droplets actually do not fall on us. So we also need to put in much emphasis on what is already on the ground.
Okay, thank you so much, Modesta. But again, I have just one last question as we wrap up the program. So what message do you have to the people out there? In other words, let me just say, would you maybe highlight or sensitize someone who's taking the coronavirus issue lightly in this time and era?
Well, we are fighting an invisible enemy,
Okay.
one that we cannot see. And then it is also very infectious, which means it can easily pass from one person to another. We are seeing deaths happening in numbers, in huge numbers. So there's need for us to actually pay attention to what has been given to us by the minister, what other people are talking, like the World Health Organization, the measures that we've been given to actually adhere to them and also practice whatever has been given to us.
What about those people who use public transport? What advice would you give them?
They also need to keep social distance.
How?
If it's
on
possible.
the bus? On the bus. This is a small bus, and I'm expected to sit next to 3 people. I don't know. I don't know where they're coming from. I've never seen them before. I just met them on the bus. It could be they traveled out of the country and they came in. They are using these local transport. So how best can you advise on that particular issue?
Well, unless you start a conversation with the person right next to you, and then they speak and they speak.
But the social distance on the bus, and then the issue of speaking, the droplets, the coronavirus. Would you not say out contact the virus speaking to someone?
There are ways of actually preventing it, even if you contract it. So the washing of hands. There's also need to constantly drink warm water, which is one of the measures that we've been given by the World Health Organization. Wash your hands every time you come from a public place. Sanitize your hands.
Okay.
Drink a lot of water. If possible, warm water can help. Because we are told that it stays around the throat for some time before it goes to your lungs, which now it becomes deadly. But if it goes into your stomach, by virtue of you drinking a lot of water, or water every now and then, the acid in the stomach can actually destroy the virus.
So would you recommend, in your own view, of course, would you recommend maybe the public transport owners to put in measures of us washing hands before entering onto the bus, or maybe sanitize our hands? Can they provide us with those facilities, looking at the fact that we don't know the people we are meeting out there?
I think that should be a requirement, because different people get onto those buses, and then they've been given a restriction on how many people should actually sit. So there's need to actually pay attention to what has been given to them, so that we limit the transmission of this disease that we're fighting. There's no vaccine, there's no medicine for it. So it's up to the individuals. And to people out there, if it's possible to stay home, stay home. And if you are moving at a distance where you can walk, I think walking is more recommended than getting on a bus for a short distance. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Modesta. Well, viewers, thank you so much for having stayed tuned. This has been the Jctr Corner. Until next time, goodbye.